This story follows Aaliyah Greene, the daughter of a black janitor at a prestigious dance academy, who becomes the target of a cruel prank meant to humiliate her. What starts as a joke turns into a moment that exposes the fault lines of race class and power in elite spaces, and sparks a revolution no one saw coming. "Hey, Aaliyah, want to show us your best ballerina move?" Olivia Stanton's voice rang across the marble studio, like a glass dropped on tile polished cold and meant to break. It wasn't a real invitation. Everyone knew that. Not when it came from the most powerful girl at Riverside Classical Dance Academy, the daughter of billionaire investors, and the unofficial queen of the studio. Aaliyah, 12 years old, stood in her mother's faded tennis shoes, her hair tied back with a scarf that still smelled of bleach and lavender from the janitor's closet. The air was thick with hairspray and expectation. Around her stood a semicircle of girls in pale pink tights and European point shoes, their perfect hair buns swaying as they laughed and whispered. Their phones were already out, cameras ready not to celebrate a performance, but to record humiliation. Keisha Green, her mother, was on her knees in the back of the room, scrubbing the mirror baseboards with a cracked bucket of water beside her. She didn't lift her head. She didn't have to. She knew this rhythm, this music of cruelty. She'd grown up hearing it in different languages in different cities, but always the same melody. Silence. A pause. Then the taunt disguised as inclusion. She scrubbed harder, as if the tile could absorb her rage. It was Thursday, 4:55 p.m., and Ms. Eleanor Carter, the only black teacher at the academy, was supposedly in a staff meeting upstairs. But she wasn't. She had paused on the mezzanine staircase, hearing the laughter, but choosing for now not to interrupt. Her heart tightened as she recognized Olivia's tone. Eleanor had heard it as a teenager too, except then it had come from judges and donors. She stayed hidden, watching. "Come on, it'll be fun," said another girl, Charlotte, giggling. "Show us your Swan Lake moment, superstar." Aaliyah said nothing. Her eyes scanned their faces, each one lit with the same look, the hunger to witness someone fail. She'd felt it at school, in stores, even in the church when people asked, "Your mom works there." But this time, they wanted her to dance like a monkey in a cage for the cameras, for the clicks. For a moment, she almost turned away. Almost swallowed it, like always. But something flickered deep inside her. Not defiance, not pride, but something older, heavier, like the whispered voices of all the women in her bloodline, who had bent but refused to break. Her grandmother's hymnals, her mother's midnight humming while mopping floors, the rhythm of survival in a world that said they didn't belong in places with chandeliers and parquet floors. She didn't answer with words. She simply stepped forward, removed her backpack, and stood in the center of the polished wood. Olivia's brows raised, amused. "You're really going to try this?" she scoffed. "Okay, fine. If she can do 10 fouettes without falling, I don't know, clap or something." Her friends laughed harder. "But if she fails, she doesn't get to hang around here anymore like she's one of us. No more watching from the corner like she belongs." Aaliyah didn't flinch. Keisha stopped scrubbing her fist, frozen on the rag. She didn't speak, didn't breathe. Not because she feared her daughter would fail, but because she recognized the silence before the storm. The stillness that came before something sacred broke through. Unseen from above, Ms. Carter leaned forward slightly. Her eyes not on the crowd, but on Aaliyah's stance. She noticed how the girl aligned her shoulders, how her feet found perfect fifth position barefoot, how the noise seemed to drain from the room the moment Aaliyah took her breath. "Start the music," Olivia snapped, already adjusting her phone's camera. But Aaliyah didn't need music. She had memorized the tempo of the academy from hundreds of nights cleaning alongside her mother. Her cue was the ticking clock on the wall. Her rhythm was the heartbeat of women who had danced before her, unseen and uninvited. She spun, not perfectly, not like the trained ballerinas who paid $200 an hour for technique from European instructors. But her spin carried something more. Her arms moved not with precision, but with power, with weight, with intention. Her first fouette landed sharp. Then the second. Then the third. By the fifth, Olivia's laughter had stopped. By the eighth, phones began to lower. A hush fell, like a velvet curtain. And by the 10th, no one remembered why they had laughed in the first place. Aaliyah kept spinning. Not to prove herself, but because this movement, this space was the only time the world didn't shrink her. When she spun, she wasn't the janitor's daughter. She was everything they never expected. Every turn was a prayer. Every landing a promise. She reached 12, 15, 19. The whispers turned into stunned silence. And then Ms. Carter moved finally. But what she was about to say would change the academy forever. Who taught her that? Olivia whispered, but the words barely made it past her lips. No one answered. Because deep down, they all knew the truth. That kind of grace doesn't come from money. It comes from pain, from repetition, from the need to be seen when the world refuses to look. Ms. Eleanor Carter stepped forward slowly, her low heels echoing against the hardwood, like a judge walking toward a witness stand. The girls turned in unison, startled. Most hadn't realized she was there. But Keisha had. She met Eleanor's eyes across the studio floor. Both women understanding something unspoken, something carved into them over years of being told to stay quiet, keep their heads down, and let the real dancers have the spotlight. I taught her, Keisha said softly, standing up now, the rag still clutched in her fist like a flag. Not in here, not formally, but enough. Olivia blinked, confused. Wait, you mean like in your apartment or something? Like in this studio, Keisha replied. After you all left. The words rippled like thunder through the studio. Eleanor watched as the girls looked to one another, uncomfortable now. Not because Aaliyah had danced, but because everything they believed about status, about skill, about who belonged here, had just been cracked open. But that's not possible, muttered Charlotte. You can't just learn fouettes from your mom cleaning floors. That's what I used to think too, Eleanor said calmly, walking toward Aaliyah. Until someone reminded me that talent doesn't follow admission criteria. It rises in silence. It grows in shadows. The room held still. Aaliyah's chest rose and fell. She hadn't said a word since her performance. She didn't need to. Her body had spoken for her. You know, Eleanor continued, looking directly at Olivia. Now there was a time I wanted to audition for the National Youth Company. I was 16, trained for years. I thought I was ready. You didn't make it, Olivia asked, her voice unsteady now. Oh, I made it through auditions, Ms. Carter replied, lips twitching in a half smile. But they told me the audience wouldn't connect with someone who looked like me. So they gave the part to the daughter of a trustee instead. Told me to try again, maybe with a straighter bun and a lighter foundation. No one spoke. I promised myself I'd never let another girl like me believe she had to beg to belong. Eleanor continued. But I did let it happen. Right here. While I stood by. She turned to Aaliyah now. Until you reminded me why I started dancing in the first place. Keisha, standing beside a mop bucket she could no longer pretend to need, stepped forward and touched her daughter's shoulder. She danced in the dark, Miss Carter. Every night while I cleaned, she spun and leapt and fell and got back up again. I didn't give her form. I gave her space. Eleanor smiled, tired but proud. That space was more than most girls get. Suddenly Olivia spoke. Wait. The video. The one Her voice faltered. She looked at her phone as if it had become something dangerous. Not a tool of mockery anymore, but a relic of shame. Go ahead. Aaliyah said, her voice steady and low. You can keep it. No, Eleanor interrupted, her tone firm. You'll delete it or post it with the truth. That this isn't some rags to riches fairy tale. This is a mirror. For all of us. Charlotte stepped back. This is so much bigger than a joke. Yes, Ms. Carter nodded. And maybe it's time this school starts being bigger too. The moment lingered in the air like a final note at the end of a symphony. The kind you don't clap after, Because it demands silence. It demands respect. Then, for the first time, Aaliyah looked Olivia in the eye and spoke not as someone begging for entry, but as someone who had already claimed her space. "You thought I came here to watch," she said quietly. "But I've been learning the whole time." That's when Ms. Carter turned to the stunned girls and said the words that would shift the axis of the entire academy. "I'm calling the board tonight. We're changing how this place sees talent. And it starts with her." Aaliyah blinked. "Wait." What she whispered. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from disbelief. Moments ago, she'd been spinning for her dignity. Now Ms. Carter, someone she'd only ever seen from the back of a classroom or the edge of a studio, was calling the board. For her. "You heard me," Eleanor said, eyes locked on the phone in Olivia's shaky hand. "I've let this place stay comfortable for too long. That ends tonight." The room stayed still, like the air itself didn't want to interrupt what was happening. Keisha's eyes filled not with sadness, but recognition. She had cleaned these floors for almost a decade. She had raised her daughter in the echoes of other people's music. But now, for the first time, someone with a title with power was speaking the words she'd always carried, but never dared say aloud. "I want to show you something," Eleanor continued, voice calm but urgent. "All of you, follow me." The girls looked to one another. Olivia hesitated, torn between shame and curiosity, but eventually followed, phone still gripped tight. Keisha stayed behind with Aaliyah, wiping the sweat from her daughter's brow. "You okay, baby?" she whispered. Aaliyah nodded slowly. I think I'm finally breathing." Ms. Carter led them to the back wing of the academy, down a narrow hallway with no mirrors or chandeliers. At the end was a locked room, old dusty. The school called it the archive. Most of the girls had never even been in it. She unlocked it with a brass key she carried like a secret. Inside, shelves were lined with programs, newspaper clippings, and dusty VHS tapes. Ms. Carter moved toward a yellowed scrapbook on the middle shelf. She flipped to a page and held it open. "That's me," she said, pointing to a black and white photo. "Junior soloist, 1996. I had just gotten into the regional youth company. And this?" She turned the page to a letter. "Is the rejection they gave me 3 weeks later. Said I didn't align with donor expectations." The room fell silent again. "I kept it," she said, not as a wound, but as proof of how deeply this place has learned to pretend excellence only looks one way. Aaliyah stepped forward. She ran her fingers over the letter, then looked up at Ms. Carter. "So why did you stay here? Why come back to a place that broke you?" "Because I believed one day someone would walk through those doors and remind me that our stories don't end in rejection letters," Eleanor replied. "And that even when a system doesn't see you, you can still be the one to break it open." The girls looked at each other, visibly shaken, not just by the injustice, but by the fact that they'd benefited from it without ever questioning it. "You think scholarships are just handed out to kids with grit," Olivia murmured. "I've had private coaches since I was 6. I thought that was normal." "It is for you," Keisha said gently, who had followed them into the room now. "But for most of us, we don't get normal. We get invisible." The word hung in the air. Invisible. Until now. Eleanor reached for her phone. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm putting in a formal request to the board tonight to start a new merit-based admissions track, one that isn't tied to legacy families or alumni funding." "You can do that?" Charlotte asked, astonished. "I'm faculty," Eleanor replied, "and I've been silent long enough." Olivia stepped forward slowly, offering her phone to Aaliyah. "I'll delete the video, or post it with whatever you want to say. You deserve that." Aaliyah stared at the phone, then gently pushed it back. "Let the video speak for itself," she said. "But tell the truth when you share it. Not just about me, but about this place." Keisha smiled, pride blooming in her chest. It was the same look she'd seen on her mother's face years ago when Keisha, age 9, first led a praise dance solo in their Alabama church. Back then, She didn't know that rhythm and defiance could mix. Now, watching her daughter command silence in a room full of privilege, she realized she had passed on more than just steps, she had passed on fire. Back in the studio, as the girls returned, one of them whispered, "We should have seen it. We should have known." But the truth was, they weren't taught to look in places like janitor closets or nighttime shadows. They weren't taught to believe that brilliance could come barefoot uninvited. Aaliyah walked across the studio once more, not to perform, not to impress, but to stand where she had once sat quiet and overlooked. She turned to the group and said, "You can keep your mirrors. I'll be dancing in the light now." And with that, Ms. Carter made the call. Her voice didn't tremble. Her hands didn't shake. Because the revolution had already begun, and it started with one girl spinning, and a system finally starting to tilt. Ms. Carter's voice was steady as she spoke to the board over speakerphone standing in the middle of the studio, as if claiming sacred ground. "Yes, I'm making the request formally," she said, glancing toward Aaliyah. "I've identified a candidate whose performance today reveals the need for an immediate structural review of our admissions policy. This cannot wait." The girls sat silently along the studio wall, no longer perched like critics, but grounded like witnesses. Aaliyah leaned against her mother, the warmth of Keisha's arm, a quiet reminder that strength didn't always roar. It often stood still and refused to move. As Ms. Carter ended the call, she looked over the group. "The board will meet Monday. They want a presentation." She paused. "We'll give them one." The next 2 days moved unlike anything Aaliyah had ever experienced. The studio became both battleground and birthplace. Ms. Carter cleared schedules, opening space for something she'd never done before: collaborative preparation. "Not just for Aaliyah," she told the girls. "For all of you. Because if you want to be part of this new chapter, you have to help write it." Olivia, to everyone's surprise, volunteered first. "I want to be there Monday. I want to tell them what I saw, and what I failed to see for too long." Aaliyah didn't say much. She didn't need to. Each time she stood at the center of the studio to rehearse, the others watched differently now, not from above, but beside. For the first time, they weren't comparing. They were learning. But outside the studio, whispers had already started. Word spread fast in elite circles, and not everyone liked what they were hearing. Some parents, upon hearing rumors of the janitor's daughter incident, made calls. One particularly sharp email came from Olivia's own mother, demanding that her daughter not entangle herself in diversity optics. Olivia read the email in silence, then deleted it. On Sunday night, while everyone else was resting for the presentation, Aaliyah returned to the studio alone. Keisha had given her the key with a quiet nod that said, "Go ahead, baby. This part is just for you." There, in the silence, Aaliyah danced. No audience, no mirrors. Just the ghost of every morning she had trained in secret, chasing moonlight across wood floors, while her mother mopped in rhythm. She practiced not to prove anything, but to remember. Her roots, her pulse, her why. At one point, she stopped mid-pirouette and stared at the ceiling. "Please," she whispered, not sure if it was a prayer or a promise. "Let them see what they've been missing." Monday came. The boardroom of Riverside Academy was nothing like the studio. It was colder, sharper, lined with framed photographs of past directors, all pale, all poised, all male. The chairs creaked like they didn't want to be moved. At the head of the table sat the current director, Mr. Bennett, a man known more for his fundraising skills than his artistic eye. "We've received a lot of feedback," he said, scanning the group. "Some concerned, some supportive. Ms. Carter, you have the floor." Eleanor didn't hesitate. She stood holding up a USB stick. "Before I speak, I'd like to play you something." It was the video, Olivia's original clip, but not posted to mock. This version had a title card, "When We Finally Watch What We've Ignored." The room fell into silence as Aaliyah's spins filled the screen. No narration, no edits, just raw motion, just heart. the sound of bare feet finding balance where no one expected it, and at the end, a slow fade into black. When the lights came back on, Eleanor said nothing. She simply stepped aside, and Aaliyah walked forward. "I'm not asking for charity." Aaliyah began, voice soft but certain. "I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for recognition of what's already here." She held up her worn dance shoes. "These aren't fancy, but every scuff, every tear, that's proof of how badly I wanted to be here, even when the doors were closed." The board shifted in their seats. Mr. Bennett tapped his pen. "And what exactly are you proposing, Ms. Carter?" "I'm proposing the Carter Greene Initiative," she answered. "A full scholarship program for underrepresented talent. Audition-based. Blind. No names. No backgrounds. Just movement. Just merit. And you want this?" "Why?" another member asked. Eleanor looked at Aaliyah, then back to the table. "Because we've mistaken privilege for potential for too long." And she reminded me that brilliance can bloom anywhere if we stop planting our gates in front of it. A hush fell. And then, unexpectedly, one of the older board members, Mrs. Ling, whose own granddaughter danced at the academy, spoke softly. "I've never seen anything that honest in this school," she said. "Let's vote." Hands went up. First one, then another, then another. Unanimous. When they left the boardroom, Aaliyah didn't cry. She didn't leap. She just stood in the hallway and let the weight of it all press against her chest. "We did it," Olivia whispered. "No," Aaliyah said, smiling slightly. "We just opened the door. Now, we build the stage." Aaliyah stood in the hallway for a long moment after the board vote, her fingers brushing the frayed edge of her old ballet shoes, the ones that had carried her further than anyone had expected. "We just opened the door. Now we build the stage," she had said, but even as she spoke those words, she knew the real work was only beginning. Because changing a vote was one thing, changing hearts' expectations and the weight of tradition, that was a dance of its own. News of the board's unanimous decision traveled fast. By Tuesday morning, the Carter Greene Initiative was already on the school website, an official program etched in digital permanence. The scholarship would offer full tuition to exceptional dancers from underrepresented backgrounds, with blind auditions held each spring. No names, no profiles, just movement, just merit. But not everyone was applauding. In the parents' group chat, an anonymous message spread like wildfire. "So now anyone with a sob story gets in. What about those of us who earned our place here?" Olivia saw the screenshot. She didn't flinch. She sent back a single reply. "If you think talent only exists in your zip code, you've never watched someone dance who needed it to survive." That day, Keisha arrived at the academy earlier than usual. She wore her best jeans and a clean white blouse creased from ironing, damp from nerves. Aaliyah walked beside her, dressed in a black leotard and a new pair of second-hand ballet flats, gifted by Ms. Carter. At the entrance, they were met by something unexpected: silence. Not the cold, avoidant silence that had followed them for years, but a thoughtful quiet. Girls paused their stretching. Parents looked up. Aaliyah held her mother's hand just a second longer than usual, before releasing it and walking towards Studio B. Inside, Ms. Carter had prepared something rare, an open rehearsal. Student staff and a few board members were invited to watch Aaliyah lead a hybrid piece, half classical, half modern, infused with West African-inspired footwork. It was the kind of choreography that didn't just stretch the body. It stretched the culture of the institution. "I call it the middle room," Aaliyah said to the small audience before starting. "It's the space where people like me have always lived, not quite inside, not fully shut out. It's where we watch, where we wait, until someone sees us." The music began, not a grand orchestral suite, but a slow build of hand drums and strings layered with breath and silence. Aaliyah moved with unshakable rhythm. Her arms told stories. Her feet echoed prayer. Every spin, every shift of weight held meaning. She wasn't just executing steps, she was remembering. By the final pose, the room was still. And then came the sound that changed everything. Applause. Not polite, not obligatory, but real. Among those clapping was Olivia, standing in the back, tears in her eyes. Not because she was proud of Aaliyah, but because she was proud to finally recognize what had always been there, just waiting to be named. Later that evening, as the sun fell across the academy's windows like soft gold, Ms. Carter gathered a small group in the conference room. Keisha sat at the table beside her daughter. The board chair was present, along with a few trusted faculty. "We have to do more than offer a scholarship," Carter said plainly. "This place needs a cultural reset." "What do you have in mind?" asked Mr. Bennett, no longer defensive, just curious. "We build something that redefines excellence," she replied. "We bring in guest instructors from different traditions. We introduce history, real history, into the curriculum. We pair Carter Greene scholars with mentors. And we stop pretending that discipline and dignity can only be taught through European technique." The proposal didn't land like a stone, it landed like a seed. A week later, the first changes began to take shape. Studio C, long unused and filled with dusty props, was converted into the initiative's dedicated training room. Its walls were repainted with quotes from trailblazing dancers of color, some famous, some forgotten. Keisha was invited to help co-design the room. She chose to hang her grandmother's tambourine over the door. One afternoon, while organizing the dance shoe cabinet, Keisha looked up and saw her daughter guiding a younger student through a series of foot placements. Aaliyah's voice was calm, but clear. "You don't have to dance like anyone else. Just dance like you've been waiting." The words hit Keisha like a memory. She had once said the same thing to her daughter late one night in their apartment when Aaliyah was too discouraged to practice. "Dance like you've been waiting, baby," she'd whispered. "Because one day the world will finally watch." And now, they were. Keisha stood in the doorway of Studio C, watching her daughter teach with a kind of quiet authority that didn't need volume to command attention. "Dance like you've been waiting." The words echoed inside her chest. She had spoken them as comfort, as hope. But Aaliyah was living them now, not just in how she moved, but in how she carried others with her. Girls who had once whispered behind her back now lined up to learn from her. Even the youngest, the ones with uncertain feet and shaky balance, mirrored her every gesture, as if mimicking the sun. The studio had become more than a rehearsal space. It had become a new kind of stage, one where no one had to be perfect to be seen. Word of Aaliyah's story spread beyond the walls of Riverside. The video shared by Olivia, with a new caption, "What we almost erased," went viral within days. Millions of views, thousands of comments, some emotional, some angry, some filled with hard questions, but all of them looking. National outlets picked it up. Then came the interviews. First local, then regional. Aaliyah, shy but steady, sat beside Ms. Carter on a community news broadcast. "I don't think I was meant to shock anyone," she told the host. "I just think people forgot how to see." The Academy began receiving emails from parents across the country asking about the Carter Greene initiative. "How do we apply? Can we send a video? My daughter thought she didn't belong until she saw your story." With each letter, Keisha felt the shift. Not just in the school, but in herself. For so long she had carried shame like a shadow, dragging it behind her mop bucket, tucking it between cleaning rags. But now she walked the halls with her head higher. Not because she had a new title, though she'd been officially promoted to studio coordinator, but because people finally addressed her by name. One afternoon, as Keisha was organizing the prop storage, she found Ms. Carter kneeling beside a stack of old playbills. They'd been water-damaged, yellowed by time. "Some of these are older than the building," Carter said, half laughing. "But none of them have a black girl on the cover." Keisha leaned against the shelf. "Guess that's about to change." Ms. Carter looked up, her smile heavy with truth. "I never thought I'd see it happen. Not here." "You didn't see it," Keisha said. "You built it." The silence between them was soft, heavy, sacred. But outside that quiet circle of growth, resistance was stirring. An op-ed, published in a well-known arts magazine, questioned whether Riverside's new direction was diluting classical purity for social appeasement. The writer, a retired critic known for championing technical rigor, accused the Academy of using emotion over execution to earn sympathy points. The piece was thinly veiled, but the implication was loud. This isn't real ballet. This is politics. Ms. Carter printed the article and pinned it on the bulletin board of Studio C. She underlined the phrase, "emotion over execution" in red ink, and wrote underneath, "Let them feel it then." That week, Aaliyah choreographed a solo for the Academy's upcoming winter showcase. Not for competition, not to prove anything, but as a declaration. She called it threadwork. "It's about all the pieces of me that used to feel separate," she explained during rehearsal. "My mom's roots, my body shape, my church rhythm, my classical training, all stitched together like one long line I never knew I was weaving." Her movements were stitched too. A slow plie into a sudden gospel reach. A pointed toe dragging the floor like chalk before erupting into a spin that carried more story than technique. Ms. Carter watched from the corner, hand over her mouth. And beside her, unexpectedly, was Mrs. Ling, the elder board member who had voted for the initiative. She had come early, just to observe. After the rehearsal, Mrs. Ling approached Aaliyah gently. "When I was your age," she said, "I was told I didn't look right for the Nutcracker. Too dark," they said. "Too angular." "I stopped dancing for 20 years. Aaliyah blinked. "I'm sorry." "No," Mrs. Ling replied. "I'm glad. Because today I got to watch someone who looked like all the pieces I was told to hide." The showcase was set for Friday. Posters went up. Emails went out. Tickets sold fast. The buzz wasn't just about the performance. It was about who was performing. The girl once mocked in the corner was now headlining an entire night of movement. But Aaliyah wasn't interested in the spotlight. She was interested in the message. "We're not changing the Academy," she told the cast in final rehearsal. "We're showing what it could have been all along." As Friday approached, she sat once more in Studio C alone under the low lights. Her mother sat nearby, folding programs, humming softly. "Are you ready?" Keisha asked. Aaliyah nodded. "I think I've always been ready. I just didn't know it was allowed." Outside, a line was forming at the door. Inside, a legacy was waiting to be rewritten. The line outside the Academy stretched around the corner, a river of anticipation winding through crisp winter air. Inside, Aaliyah stood, just behind the velvet curtain, her heart steady, not because she wasn't nervous, but because this time she knew what she was carrying. Not just choreography, not just a solo, but a history long ignored and a future finally unfolding. Keisha adjusted the back of her daughter's costume fingers, trembling just slightly. "You don't need to prove anything tonight," she whispered. "You already changed the room." Aaliyah looked in the mirror at her broad shoulders, her deep brown skin glowing beneath the stage lights. Her hair twisted into a soft bun, adorned with a golden ribbon from her grandmother's tambourine. "I'm not dancing to prove," she said. "I'm dancing to remember." The stage manager gave the signal. The lights dimmed. The crowd hushed. Then silence. A single spotlight. And Aaliyah stepped forward. The music was unlike anything the Academy had ever programmed before, a blend of cello African drums and soft ambient synths. It pulsed like memory. Her opening sequence was deliberate hands reaching low to the floor, pulling upward, as if gathering broken threads from the ground and weaving them skyward. Each movement bled into the next, stitched with emotion so raw it bypassed technique and spoke straight to the body. There was no applause break, no cheers, just breathless silence as the crowd followed her through every spin, every grounded leap, every pause that held more weight than motion. At the end, she held still in center stage, arms out, head tilted toward the rafters. And then, release. The audience rose in waves, not because of the choreography, but because they had felt it. Ms. Carter was already crying, standing in the wings beside Mrs. Ling, who pressed a hand to her heart. Even Mr. Bennett, the headmaster, stood slowly, eyes wide with something between awe and reckoning. Backstage, Aaliyah didn't bask in the applause. She walked straight to her mother and collapsed into her arms. "It's done," she whispered. "But it's only starting." That night, the performance was shared online, in full captioned, "Simply Threadwork, a story the stage almost missed." It reached 1 million views in under 72 hours. And with it came messages from dance teachers, youth programs, even prestigious companies asking about the Carter Greene model. 2 weeks later, the National Arts Network announced a new grant initiative based on Riverside's reform. Other academies began requesting workshops. Ms. Carter, once a sidelined instructor, was now being invited to speak at national conferences on inclusion in classical training. But the most meaningful change came quietly. Every Wednesday afternoon, Studio C stayed open for community dancers. No tuition, no credentials, just music and space. Aaliyah taught most of the classes. Sometimes she showed proper form. Sometimes she asked her students to improvise, to move from memory instead of mirror. "I don't care if you point your toe perfectly," she'd tell them. "I care if I believe you." Olivia often helped out, taking on admin work for the scholarship and mentoring new applicants. She didn't talk much about the prank that started it all. Not out of shame, but because she knew the best apology was showing up again and again differently. Keisha, now officially Dance Facilities Director, started teaching introductory rhythm classes, sharing clapping patterns, call and response steps from her church days, and folk routines she once thought no one would ever value. Students lined up outside her door. And then came the letter. It was printed on thick ivory paper, addressed to Miss Aaliyah Greene. At first, she thought it was spam. But when she read it aloud in the kitchen, her mother dropped a dish. "You've been selected," Aaliyah read slowly, "to represent the United States at the International Young Dancers Gala in Paris." Silence. Then Keisha said, "Baby, that's the stage your great-grandmother used to dream about from her porch in Birmingham." "I know," Aaliyah whispered. "I think she's been dancing through me the whole time." In Paris, Aaliyah wore a costume handmade by her mother, a soft white dress with threadwork along the hem, names sewn in gold thread: Keisha, Eleanor, Mercedes. She danced barefoot, on purpose, and when she finished there was no question. Not about whether she belonged, not about whether her story was art. The world didn't just see her that night. It listened. And somewhere in the audience, a little black girl sat wide-eyed, holding her mother's hand, whispering, "She looks like me." Because now, finally, she could believe it.